Today I'm going to tell you about 3 of the most relevant areas of reading in the content area for me. I'll start with vocabulary. As mentioned by Dr. Mary E. Curtis in the technical vocabulary video, vocabulary is crucial to being able to read and comprehend. If you don't understand the meanings of the words, you won't have a clue about what you are reading. One of the top reasons students fall behind or fail is due to poor vocabulary. That also goes with the article we used for our first position paper, in which it discussed the lack of help for students in higher grades with reading. Vocabulary is a skill more often concentrated on early in schooling. If students don't understand it then, there's not much help available to them later on. Vocabulary is also more than just learning words and moving on, which I feel is what happens in today's classrooms. You have a vocabulary book, introduce the words, complete a few workbook pages on them, and then move to the next chapter. To successfully teach and learn vocabulary, it requires direct and explicit instruction, multiple opportunities to hear the words across varied contexts, and active tasks. So basically, the words need explained to them directly and applied not only with teachers, but also independently. You need to encourage multiple encounters to learn word meanings in lots of different areas, for example, across different subjects or in different books. You also need to have tasks where students are actually working with words rather than just receiving them or listening to what the words mean as a teacher reads them from a book. The last point by Dr. Curtis I found relevant and stood out to me was conversational versus academic vocabulary and brick and mortar words. Conversational vocabulary is all the vocabulary that we use on everyday oral skills, conversations with friends, family, coworkers, so on and so forth. Academic vocabulary is content specific, which brings about the brick and mortar words. The brick and mortar words have to do with building a house or building the vocabulary understanding in the content area. The mortar words are the key concepts and words you need to understand the brick words or the domain-specific words. You need to have the background knowledge or the mortar words to understand those brick words. Students will be lost if they don't understand the mortar words, and as teachers, we need to keep it in our minds to take the time to break down words and meanings before we can expect students to fully understand that academic vocabulary or content-specific terminology. The second most relevant area of reading in the content area that I found stood out to me was teaching for diversity. I'm not a full-time teacher, so I don't know where I'm going to get a job. Therefore, I need to be prepared to teach any type of child in any type of an environment with any type of issue. There is a rapid increase of diversity in the U.S. classrooms, and as teachers, we need to prepare ourselves. Reading and writing are going to be among the most critical and most difficult barriers to overcome for students. They come from all over the world with all different reading levels, backgrounds, and home lives. Inclusion is also becoming more and more popular in United States classrooms, which attributes to the diversity of learners we will have in our own individual classrooms. For example, we will have students with learning disabilities, giftedness, physical handicaps, and/or behavior disorders. As a teacher, you now have to be able to cater to a wide variety of needs by your students, regardless of background, ethnicity, race, religion, grade level, reading level, etc. When teaching for diversity, you need to be able to assess your students, assess yourself, and use differences among students in a positive way. What it means to assess your students is to know their interests, their backgrounds, their limitations, and their goals in order to help you as a teacher plan the best way for how and what to teach them. I like the example discussed in the textbook of the semantic map and how I can model it and then all the students can share it with the class. Not only do they get to know a bit about me, but the students can learn about one another and see the differences in a positive light. To assess yourself, you need to know your own personal beliefs and how those beliefs will be played out in the classroom. And that's crucial so that you treat all of your students with the respect that they deserve. One of the most important parts about teaching for diversity is to remember that equal is not always fair. This was also discussed in one of the videos, as well as myself having learned it in several classes. I know for a fact that equal is not always fair and have seen this in a classroom. During subbing, I've had to make split-second decisions about a child where other students have said, hey, that's not fair. And I've had to explain to them that everyone needs certain supports to be successful. Sometimes it's more support, sometimes it's less, but it's always different, and it's always going to get everyone to the same outcome. And something that was crucial in the video that I really liked is how important it was for parent involvement. If parents don't understand that equal is not always fair and that different students will be getting different types of supports, there's going to be an uproar, and parents are going to be going against you instead of being on your side and in support of it. So getting parents involved, and you really need to take the time to explain to them and show to them how equal is not always fair and how this will help all the students reach the best or highest level of success that they can get. The last relevant point I am going to discuss is student engagement. I like that this was brought up because I feel like many students don't have the motivation for learning, let alone reading. Providing students with incentives will make them more willing to complete a task, and by identifying interests, you can teach to those interests or provide more materials in the classrooms on those interests. So if I apply this to reading, I can have incentives of candy, coupons, whatever gets those groups of students going, and say the more that they read, the different types or levels of incentives that they can gain. And I can also keep books on what they are more interested in and what they will be willing to read on their own. I also believe that the environment and example or attitude toward reading that you set as a teacher makes a world of a difference for students. Some things to keep in mind is the classroom environment, silent sustained reading, and reading aloud to your students. Keeping the environment rich in print materials, having a classroom library, or many posters around the room really makes for a positive reading experience. Anywhere the students look in the classroom, they'll see reading in a positive way. When it comes to SSR, or silent sustained reading, I liked how the textbook brought up that the teacher should also partake in the silent sustained reading. So not only do you set apart time in class for your students to read and you expect them to read, but if they see you reading also, it sets a really good example for them. And when it comes to reading aloud, it gives students a break from the hard work and just letting them enjoy listening to a story. While student teaching in 3rd grade, this was my students' favorite part of the day, and I can tell you from personal experience, as a child, I always loved when my teachers would read to me. Lastly, student engagement when it comes to varying teaching methods or making connections. As a teacher, you also have to vary your teaching methods, and you have to do this to keep things exciting. You can't let things become routine or mundane. You have to mix it up. This can come from doing group work to individual work. It all depends on your teaching style. And then making connections. You have to make connections in your students' lives so they know why what they are learning is going to be relevant and important in their lives. This has been done all through my undergrad. It's been drilled into our heads, And in my student teaching experience, I was surprised when I would say to my students, why do you think this is important? How do you think you're going to use this in your life? And a lot of times that got students a lot more excited and they had great ideas. I've seen a lot of success with making connections, and I think that's a very important thing to not forget. Well, there you have it. Vocabulary, teaching for diversity, and student engagement are the 3 most relevant areas of reading in the content area for me.